Good afternoon or good morning, wherever you are. If you're watching the recording or anything like that, welcome to this RevLifter webinar. We are here today. I'm joined by Yates Jarvis from Two Visions. He's joined us to talk about some research they've done about discounts and promotions, something we came across and think is really, really interesting, and so really wanted to share with our audience. So Yates is going to take us through a bit of that research, and then I've got some questions for him, which he's going to answer. A little bit about Yates before I hand over to him. So he's an experienced consultant, consulted with over 1,000 companies across various industries. He's a seasoned e-commerce expert and strategist, and successfully helped to scale direct-to-consumer businesses. Before launching Two Visions, he was the managing director at eHouse Studio, an award-winning CX UX e-commerce firm. And before eHouse, he co-owned Scout Advisor, and this is interesting, a sabermetric and predictive technology firm adopted by 19 MLB teams for our UK audience, that's baseball, and collaborated with Warner Brothers on Clint Eastwood's movie Trouble with the Curve. I've got to ask Yates, because I think everybody will want to know more about that. Can you tell us a little bit about that before we crack on?
Yeah. So interestingly, baseball really was going through what marketing is going through today. They had more data than they knew what to do with, and they wanted to compete with it. And there also was a ton of human gut feel stuff going on in analyzing baseball. And so they had the same swings marketing has had, from, the Mad Men type of thing, so the creative gut feel pitch thing, back to data, to whoa, we could kill this with just data, and the data doesn't tell the whole story. And it's about this mixed. Well, when Moneyball came out, we worked with the Oakland A's and we were part of that whole Moneyball thing as well. That was a very data oriented, situation and film to capture that. But Trouble with the Curve was a reaction from Clint Eastwood about, hey, there's a humanity to this. And so we were involved in the filming of that. They used actual staff from the Atlanta Braves, and all of the screens in the film and that sort of thing, when they're looking at the scouting interfaces, we designed those, and they're from the systems we built for the teams and that sort of thing. So it was very exciting. That was a different chapter of life. It was living and breathing baseball, but it actually ended up converting into marketing in strange ways, and it was very prophetic for what we're going through.
Awesome. It sounds fascinating. Before you get into your presentation, I'm going to hand over to you to talk a little bit about your research. Just to say to the audience, if you have any questions, any comments, things like that, do use the Q&A in the Zoom Q&A or the chat. It's absolutely fine. If we have time for questions at the end, we'll get to those. But for now, I'm just going to hand over to you, Yates, to talk a bit about your research.
Okay, sounds good. So what we're going to be talking about today will be the discounting promotions research. It is focused on apparel in particular. We worked with 2,200 US participants. This is a legitimate sample size, particularly for the US population. There was a 2% margin of error at 95% confidence, which just is telling us, hey, this is enough to make some good decisions from the data. The report, if you want to go check it out after the webinar, is located at twovisions.org/promo report. We've got some key findings on there that you can check out. It's pretty long, and I'll be breaking down some of those right now together. In addition to that, we also push out other vertical specific research for free to the industry for e-commerce brands. This year already, we've released one for home decor, one on personal care and beauty, and another on clothing and accessories. All of these have been focused on in-store versus online preferences. Again, this is US based. Returns and warranties, discovery channels where people are discovering products, and then loyalty factors. And we break those down per vertical. We're going to be running with 4, 5, or 6 more of these this year as well. You can check those out at twovisions.org/e-commerce market research. So let's dive into this one on discounts and promotions. Right off the bat, one thing that we saw was when we're thinking about discount levels, there is an increasing need to increase the level of discount that we're offering. Many clients I've worked with have wanted to avoid this like the plague. they're afraid of playing a game that is ever increasing with these discount levels. And we are seeing that. We're seeing that now 20% was the minimum for positive relative preference from consumers. It doesn't mean that 10 or 15 doesn't, maybe impact them, but it's not anywhere close to the way it used to. I think for maybe a decade now, brands have been using the 10 or 15% as an offer for email subscription or text subscription. And these levels have just kind of been seen as throwaway numbers. And they're no longer doing a lot to make significant impacts to conversion rate. So we saw that the 20% was a psychological level that was kind of the floor now. 50%, 50% plus moved likelihood to buy to 99% if the product was loved. So just interesting there, if the product is loved by the person looking at it more than liked, and they view it as a product they have to have, if the discount is 50% or higher, the likelihood to purchase went up to 99%. Another takeaway, uniqueness and scarcity. We studied the combination of discounting alongside affinity, which was how much they liked or loved the product, but also aside the uniqueness of the product, if they perceive the product as being highly unique. And for clothing, this is important. A denim is denim, a shirt's a shirt. But if they view it as very unique, maybe there's a texture to it, or there's some sort of function to the item. How much did that play into purchase decisions? And the other factor was scarcity. So if they knew that this item was always going to be available, did that have any impact in the purchase decision versus if they thought that this was going to be gone and the item was not going to be available in the next 4 weeks? What we found was that uniqueness and scarcity, when measured up against the discount level and the affinity of the product, while they were influential, it was negligible compared to the other two. And these really worked best as items to bundle and to make as closers to tip someone over an edge. But it wasn't as much of an influence as the discount and the affinity of the product. Moving from liking to loving an item was absolutely paramount. It had a similar impact on purchase behavior as moving from a 25 to a 50% off discount, which is it's a significant move there. So liking an item was relatively neutral. They kind of just assume they're going to like items. They didn't look at liking an item as really a great thing. It was very neutral. So a focus on the actual product fit and the positioning of the product itself, you can't avoid it. You're not going to be able to discount your way out of that. We'll talk about this a little bit later about the need for affinity for discounting to really start to fire off. But it's important to note that if you're looking to study something to make the best use of your discounts, you want to study how much the customers love what they're buying and are not on the fence about it. We also looked at if they feel on the fence about something, and if they do, it was a strong negative relative preference. Discount fever is here to stay. Yeah, so I wish I could say, hey, there's not really a taste for discounts anymore. We can give up on that. It's not the case. 62% of people said that they primarily delayed clothing purchases until they were discounted. So that doesn't mean that they won't find themselves buying something that's not discounted, but it does mean that the majority specifically have a strategy of kind of waiting to buy until it's discounted. So what this means is that discount has to be a very important part of how we merchandise and how we market. And if we want to have significant conversion rate and customer lifetime value impacts, we have to discount really, really well. I'm not here to pump up RevLifter in particular. They invited me to speak on this. But the fact is that software systems that allow you to target and tailor these promotions, it's an absolute essential because you only have so much money that you're going to dedicate to discounts from top line, and you need to use that very well so that it actually makes a change to the business. And many of the clients that I work with, our average e-commerce revenue that we manage per year is about 500 million. We've got some real large clients, and then we've got some small and everything in between. But we don't see a lot of intelligence in using these discounting engines, and they really lean on the engine to do most of the work. So if you can think about what an internal take on how we tier or tailor or personalize discounts, that can become a competitive advantage for you. So, in the day to day, it's a lot to think about. There's a million moving pieces, and this is just one more of them. But if you can get away, light a candle, put on some music, take 20 minutes and start to jot down, okay, if I could take our discounting budget and spread this in a way that could really activate, how would I do that? And using third-party software systems is going to be crucial to doing that. And Dan did not pay me to say that. When a shopper's on the fence about an item, we discussed this earlier, only the 50+% discount level made any sort of a difference. So if they didn't like the item, if they were kind of like, nah, you couldn't move them. You could not move them with a discount. You could throw 40% out there. They're going, maybe not. Oh yeah, we ran, if they loved a group of people that loved a product and we gave them 10% off versus people that were unsure about a product, but we gave them 50% off. When we ran that simulation on the model of the entire US population, the market was a 50-50 split. So half of people would buy it at that 50+% level, but the other half would go, no, and they'd go for the one they loved at just 10% off. Okay, those are some specific takeaways from the research that the research stated. If I were an e-commerce brand and I'm looking at this, some of the takeaways for my brand are as follows. Discounting well is possible, but it takes more targeting, intel, and testing effort than brands dedicate. How we discount and how we learn from our discounting behaviors is so important. To look at discounting as a hypothesis, just like we do with UX, A/B testing, or any sort of testing for performance. We want to have a hypothesis, and then we need to get it activated through systems, but then we need to learn from that. And much of that learning, it can be programmatized and the system can do it, but you really want the humans inside your organization to be able to know what we're learning about who you're able to sell to today and how they're responding, how the different segments of your customers are responding to these discounts. So let the program do some of it, but you also need to know, okay, what were the things that really made a big impact when we changed how we discounted? The offer medium matters. In the research report, you will see we tested Black Friday, Cyber Monday, coupon codes, email subscriptions. When we looked at these different methods of delivering, there's also obviously site-wide, friends and family, flash sale, these sort of things. All of these offer mediums really matter. So again, it's a targeted test. There isn't just a silver bullet, hey, this is what's going to work. You need to try for your brand. And the most important thing is that you can learn rapidly what worked and what didn't. And then you can change and test again. And again, if you're doing that, you're going to be in a top echelon of your competitors. Not many people are doing this very well right now. Okay, and we talked about this, the offer level really matters. So the 20 versus the 30. And what we're seeing is that different segments of your customer database will react to these levels differently. So when we looked at, there's a cluster, I'll mention this later, but we noticed that millennials and Gen Z really cluster in preference around these levels, and baby boomers and Gen X cluster and are more similar in their preferences. And we're seeing differences as well between men and women in offer levels and how they prefer. So those offer levels matter. You can't just throw out a 20. Really consider when you might throw out more drastic offer levels, how you'll do it so that maybe it's not site-wide, or you can tier it, obviously, with different levels of cart sizes. But you want to have a hypothesis around it, and you want to throw out a goal of what sort of CVR increase this is going to make for you. And assume that, let's say you throw out a 40% discount, assume that that's going to make a conversion rate increase of and throw something out there, a 20% increase in conversion rate, and you're going to learn. You're either going to hit that or you're not, and we're going to learn about it. But when you document this, document not just the level, but also what you throw it on and how you get it out to them, what the medium was that you offered the discount. Another takeaway, you cannot afford to not refine your product offering competitively. So again, we just saw the product is so important in this. And many companies, they love the smell of their own roses. And you can see people when they're walking through their product, they go, these are great. People love these. People love these. But competitively, they may need people to love them more. And it's hard to find out, how do we do that? Well, you can also run research, just like we did on the market. We work with companies that run research on the product themselves, whether this is color variance or functionality or the naming or the features, whether it's wicking or breathable or whatever. All of this can be researched and tested so that you're developing what we call more tier one products that are hero products. They sell really well, because the more of those products you have, the better your discounts are going to work for the long term. And you're not just moving product that people kind of like. Market level intent is directional. So what we've provided in these research studies is directional data. And the fact that it is vertical specific helps it to be even more directional. And like I just mentioned, you can get this down to your specific brand niche, to you and a few competitors, and that's really actionable data. The stuff that you're reading in a market research study like this, take with a grain of salt, test and use it to form hypotheses. But the kind of research that you can run for your own brand allows you to have more nuanced variables, very specific variables that we can test, and the data model fit improves, and the relative value changes among product and brand. And so you get very actionable data. So just know that that's an option. Okay. Q&A. Dan, we're halfway through. I left some time in here to answer some additional questions.
Lovely. That's very handy. I have some questions I prepared. As I said, if anybody attending wants to put in a question, please put it in the Q&A or the chat, and we'll have a look at that. One big question, really. So BFCM, Black Friday, Cyber Monday, we sometimes call it peak, whatever you want to call it, that period at the end of the year where a lot of e-commerce performance comes from. Did you learn any specific things about that from your research?
Yes, it's so interesting. Every time I study with research, I learn something new. One thing that we've known, by the way, is that senior executives often come from the field. They were heads of sales or marketing. They had a closer touch to what was going on in the market, and time has passed. And what we're seeing is that the 5 years is now 1 year, 1 year is now 6 months, meaning we have to run this research much more often because the patterns in customer preferences are just changing. For BFCM, I was kind of thinking going into this, it's played out. People have been doubting if they're really good deals anymore. I don't know if you've noticed over the last year, there was way more traffic on social media, it felt like, around people questioning, is this a scam? Are these deals even really good? And I remember seeing posts of companies that had the product discounted a couple weeks earlier for a lot more. And then, so what we saw in the research is that there is still a high preference for Black Friday, Cyber Monday. It was a 58%. People thought that the best deals of the year still came there, more than the email subscription, more than the coupon codes, more than anything else. They thought, this is how I'm going to save the most this year. So it's still relevant, and we still need to play the game. I've worked with companies that have tried to avoid playing that game, and they said, look, this is too much. We don't want to just jump into the horde and just get buried. We're going to kind of play it safe this year. We see a lot of lost sales volume. The better thing to do would be, instead of not playing, to play it smarter and really start to dial in what your strategy is for BFCM, and test again. The goal is use this period to increase customer lifetime value. That's a much better way to justify the increased discounts that you're offering. So yes, you're offering them, but challenge yourself to make it have higher impact than what you're used to seeing when you just roll out a discount on the site. we also saw that males were more sensitive and influenced by BFCM than females were, 15% higher than females. Um, I would still consider BFCM as being a critical part of your strategic discount timing during the year. And if you right size that with tier level discounts, 20% off for $100, whatever it is, and you go up. Plus, if you offer a stackable code, if you play your tiers assuming a stackable code, that would be the ultimate volume play. And people love the game of all of this and feeling like they're getting over on the company. That's what BFCM is all about. They have to believe there's a reason for this. So play into that story. Hey, we got to offload stuff this year, and let them feel like they've won, and you're going to win a sales volume game and hopefully a lifetime value game.
Yeah, no, really useful information. I definitely am 15% more likely to use a code in BFCM, so that's good that tracks that research. So some people prefer newer brands, and some people prefer the older legacy brands. Are there any differences between the kind of people who prefer new brands or legacy brands?
Yes. We didn't know when we tested what we were going to find, but we did find some differences. Those that preferred the newer brands had a higher preference towards highly unique items. You could kind of guess that when you think about it, but their preference toward more highly unique items is there. So if you're a new brand coming out, just know that you've got an advantage over the incumbents if your item is perceived as unique. Does it have to be unique, and to what degree? You kind of have to research that and test it out. But if consumers perceive it as highly unique, and they are the type of consumer that loves new brands, you're going to have an advantage. They also had a higher preference toward items being perceived as typical. Obviously, they were more forgiving on product affinity, which surprised me at first. So they were almost more willing to jump onto the exciting new brand game, and they were more forgiving on if the product had to be awesome, because they just wanted to be part of this new thing. Versus those that were more for the tried and true legacy brand, they had a much higher need for the product to be loved. And then the 25 to 30% discount levels move the needle more for those who preferred new brands. So if you're a new brand and you're throwing out a 20% off discount, you're not going to get as much bang for your buck in terms of movement and sales volume as you would at the 25 or 30% level if you are a new up-and-coming brand.
Okay, interesting. You mentioned earlier about generational differences, and I'm not going to tell anyone which generational grouping I fit into, but what are some of the key differences you found between those different generations?
Yes. So there wasn't a ton across the whole thing, but there were some key areas where there were significant differences. One thing we saw, like I mentioned earlier, there are clusters. Sometimes you don't see this. You don't always see the millennials and Gen Z and Gen X and baby boomers cluster up into the two groups of the older and the younger. That's not always the case. In this case, it was very strong clustering. So for instance, coupon code trust was 50% higher when you were the Gen Z millennial versus the Gen X boomer. This may be because they've had more experience with it. If you think about coupon codes, in many cases, you've got to know to go search the internet for them. You have to have an add-on in your browser where the coupon codes come up, that sort of thing. So it kind of lends itself more towards a digitally native generation to where they kind of know that the option exists. So that kind of makes sense. And the same thing with subscription value. We saw that millennials value brand subscriptions the most, and Gen X the least. So again, with those subscriptions, we saw the younger folks more likely to believe, hey, I'm going to get a deal from this thing. And Gen X and boomers, they're not even really looking for it as much.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I'm not going to. Yeah, definitely. I'm in one of those groups. I'm not going to say which one. You talked a little bit about levels of discount. It's actually a question we get a lot. Is people want to immediately know, like, what is the right level of discount? Where should I be pitching things? And normally we just suggest you've got to test it and find out. But you talked a little bit about that. Are there any other findings you could talk about around that?
Yeah. So to influence likelihood to purchase. And again, by the way, this research was predictive. It was done with predictive analytics. So this wasn't just a survey. we actually studied their behavior around purchase decisions in a way that they didn't even know they were doing. And then we calculated what the model of US consumers, how they would act. And I could play with this model and put different simulations into it. What we found is that a 20% discount doubles the likelihood to purchase. So that's a significant discount influence. For the 50% we mentioned earlier, that leads to a 99% more likely to buy. The 20% was the psychological threshold that we saw. And again, we're studying these thresholds not only for discount levels, but also for pricing levels. So just know you can do this for like, hey, if I price this at $9.99 versus $12.99, is that a threshold where I see greater or more limited adoption of the product? Yes, you can find these levels out. And so we saw this 20% was a big deal right now, could change next year. The other thing we saw was that women were less swayed by 50% off than men. So again, the men, they're just the money mattered, and if it's 50% off, they're ready just to do it. Even if they just kind of liked it, they're like, let's do this. The women were more careful.
Interesting. Yeah, we love a deal, men. That's just the way it is. And you mentioned scarcity a little bit earlier. So, have you got an idea of what is more effective, scarcity or discounting? What tends to be the big driver of
Yes,
purchase?
discounting far more likely to influence purchase than scarcity. I kind of thought maybe we would see it be a little closer, but scarcity and uniqueness, they just were not significant factors, except when used as kind of a tipping point right over the edge if someone was considering it. But if you're throwing out that email and, hey, there's only 2 shirts left, that sort of thing, it just compared to discounting, it doesn't mean that it's not influential. It just means if you're asking about, well, is it influential relative to discounting? The answer is no. The discounting, if you could say this will be in stock forever, but today it's 35% off, that is going to be a lot more impactful than if you say this sweater won't be around in 3 days. With scarcity and a discount, if you combine them, they were 178% more likely to buy. So it's a great combo when you put these things together. Discounts were more direct, they had a stronger impact, but scarcity boosts value, and it was again best bundled with the discounts.
Yeah, it's really interesting. It's really interesting because often we think of these things in isolation, right? And we talk about, you apply one tactic and in isolation from the others, but combining them could be incredibly powerful if you test that out and see how it goes.
Yes.
And what lengths do consumers go to get discounts? Will they go quite far to get themselves a good deal?
They absolutely will, and it really shows you we should be planning to give them ways. If 62% delay purchases in order to receive a discount, instead of fighting it, we should really find a way to embrace this and go, how do we give them ways to do what they want to do? How do we give them ways to get those discounts? And again, like I said, they want to win. They want to know a certain type of buyer, not every type of buyer, not every type of shopper, but there are many that they want to win. They want to know that they've been responsible with their money, particularly in this economic climate. They want to know, hey, I didn't waste my money. And so one way that they know that is if they get a discount that doesn't seem normal, if they feel like they've won, particularly if they can tell a spouse that they've won, I wasn't going to get it, honey. My wife will come home with things and tell me how much on sale they were. She won't tell me how much she spent, but it's the same type of psychology. So it really matters. They will use apps. They will use tools for this. This is the rise of Rakuten. You've seen this where the percentage off, people will do a whole lot to get a discount. So if we can give them ways to find those and to dig for them and feel like they've got over on us, that's a good thing, particularly if we compare it with products that win. And remember, sometimes we just try to offload products that aren't winners, and we use discounts to do that. That's okay, but I don't want to lose the fact that there's a real potential for discounting to be used on highly winning products to take scale to a hockey stick level, to really take it to the next level. And there's something that you can do in volume that really justifies the discount, particularly when you see the changes to customer lifetime value. If you're not calculating that right now, then you don't know what the impact these discounts will have to lifetime value. So it's going to be a lot harder to justify it. And then the people that can justify it can offer the discounts and they're going to get the scale. So it behooves you to begin to track that and understand the relationships.
Yeah, I like the idea that customers feel like they've won because they've got one over on us, but we've won as well. So it's a win-win-win for everybody.
Exactly.
And your research looked at Affinity. You talked a bit about Infinity. By the sounds of it, it doesn't look like a discount would persuade someone to buy who definitely didn't want something, which just goes to show you how sort of important that Affinity bit is up front. Is that what your research showed?
Yes. If people perceive the product as cheap, again, 50% off or higher, if they were on the fence about it, it would influence them. Anything less than that was a lot less likely to influence them to purchase. And if they just don't like it, they're not going to buy it.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. Well, that nicely brings us into the end. That's the end of my questions. So thank you very, very much, Yates, for sharing that research. It's really, really useful. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today.